Hello and welcome, my name is Tsuki, and today, while we're all eagerly awaiting for patch 3.3 to release, I thought I'd do a different kind of video other than just guides and gameplay, and that's a video listing the 13 current jobs in the game in their current state. And I did a video similar to this a while ago where I gave a brief overview of each of the jobs, but this time I wanted to add my own personal spin to it, and I'll be listing them in order from my least to most favorite jobs. So to emphasize, this video is not going to be a representation of what are the best jobs. In fact, I think all of the jobs are actually quite well balanced at the moment, with the exception of a couple, Warrior and Scholar. And I'll be ranking these jobs with a few main points, such as my personal enjoyment while playing them, how well I appreciate the mechanics of the job, and how much I like the image of the job. It sounds kinda weird to include that last one, but to me and others who can get a small sense of roleplay, you can kind of picture the difference between like a sturdy defender while playing Paladin or a berserk fighter when playing Warrior. And with that being said, I guess we should just get started. So to start off the list, at number 13 is Summoner. Now the reason why Summoner is the lowest for me is because out of the 13 jobs, it is the one job I've experienced playing the least. Since both Summoner and Scholar branch off from the same base class of Arcanist, I've always had my attribute points spec into mind to play Scholar, which happened to be my second level 50 job back in 2.0. So I didn't really get to play Summoner seriously until I finally decided to try it on one of my alt characters. And while it was a fresh and exciting experience at first to learn something I'd been neglecting for a while, in the end it didn't feel as fresh as I was hoping, even with the inclusion of the new Dreadworm trance mechanic. Having played Scholar for so long, I can say that I'm probably pretty biased, but to me, Summoner just felt a bit stale to me already, even after I got into 60. It felt like I had traded my Faerie and my healing capabilities for a DPS pet with a few more DPS options, and that was really it. And I wasn't a huge fan of Dreadworm Trance. While it was pretty cool to get an Ogmorn ability, the fact that your Aether Trail of 2 min stacks could wear off after a short time bothered me. It wasn't that bad to manage on boss fights, but in dungeon runs, keeping your stacks in between trash pulls was a bit frustrating. And despite maining healer for most of my time playing, I wasn't really a huge fan of the 2 caster DPS for a long time, and didn't really give either a fair shot until much later into the game's growth. However, Summoner remains as my least favorite, and that's all I can really say. Moving on, at number 12 is Dragoon. And yes, I know a lot of people really love Dragoon, but before the expansion, Dragoon was actually one of my favorite jobs, and it was the main of my alt character up until 3.0. But with the changes to the Dragoon added in the expansion, I really wasn't warming up to it. One major thing that happened across most of the simpler jobs in the game was that the expansion gave them some sort of mechanic to master. And this is where I can agree and disagree with this decision, because sometimes simple is fine. You know, you don't need something to be complex at all times. You don't need a job to be, you know, something that you need to master in order for it to be fun to play. It could just be something simple, and that's all it really needs to be, fun. And you know, fun is the main objective when you're playing a game. And you know, you don't need to make a job complex to give players a challenge. That's why fights of varying difficulties are always being made. And this is where I lost some of my love for the Dragoon job. They took a job with a very simple foundation and pushed it a bit further, and it isn't necessarily the random positionals that I didn't like, but the management of Blood of the Dragon. Again, it was a fairly reasonable to maintain on singular fights, boss fights, but it is especially difficult to keep in between pulls, and it brings another issue to the job, and that's the choice to maintain Blood of the Dragon instead of doing AoE damage on large trash pulls. I don't know how many times I've tanked a dungeon with a Dragoon in my party and seen them try to maintain Blood of the Dragon on a single enemy when there's like 9 of them. And yes, you can access Gear Skoggle that way, but it just wasn't something I liked. I like consistency and being able to control what I do at all times, and for me, Dragon was just too inconsistent for me in this expansion, and that's why I pushed it down so low on my list. At number 11, the first of the 3 Heavensward jobs to appear on my list is Machinist. I've explained why I can't really embrace this job that well several times, but I'll say it here again. And that's really because Machinist feels like it doesn't have that much of an identity. To me, it just feels like a bard and a summoner hybrid, jam-packed with utility that other jobs already had in some sort of similar form already. For a while, Machinist was my least favorite job of Heavensward. The turrets had no real interaction other than to place them in a place where it wouldn't get destroyed, and occasionally change its function with one of your abilities, and the RNG combo system was frustrating to play with, and the ammo system just felt like a cheap mechanic to me to just bypass this RNG combo system. And what kind of bullets? Break down in 30 seconds. That always made zero sense to me why bullets could even wear off in the first place. But with recent buffs not too long ago, the Machinist has slowly improved over time, and it now does have a nice niche to fill, and is a great complement to physical heavy party compositions. I still think they could have done much more interesting things with the job, but in the end, it's just an okay job to me. I don't personally play it that often, but I do find it a bit refreshing to dust it off for a roulette every now and then. At number 10 is Dark Knight, the second Heavensward job on the list. Dark Knight is actually a job that I do enjoy playing from time to time, but it is also a job that frustrates me with its design. To me, Dark Knight's MP management is a bit too distracting. I do understand the need to continuously manage your abilities and not use too much when you don't have the proper way of regaining your resources, but I feel like they have far too many abilities that spend MP and not enough to regain MP. And speaking of abilities, holy crap, Dark Knight has too many abilities. It feels like I'm playing a DPS when I play Dark Knight, with so many abilities with short cooldowns that always need to be used to keep up maximum damage. That added with the need to manage MP stacked onto each other make it truly feel like a DPS, except that it also need to manage defensive cooldowns and maintain aggro. And what it comes down to is that Dark Knight was just a bit too ambitious for me, and a bit too crammed for me to just enjoy it as a proper tank. And that's not to say I don't like Dark Knights. They're awesome and can put out some good damage. And if you're an experienced Dark Knight who has mastered the job, then you understand the awesome capabilities of the Dark Knight. But for myself personally, it's just not something I can really get behind and truly enjoy playing on more than just an occasional basis. Getting into the single digits now, and at number 9 is Ninja. Now back in A Realm Reborn when Ninja was released in patch 2.4, a lot of people were really excited. My excitement was a bit mild, but I did enjoy leveling the job to 50, and even raced my FC members to get to max level first. And I won, of course. But back then, I wasn't a huge fan of Ninja's gameplay. I thought the ninjutsu abilities were really awesome. I felt like it was a letdown to be forced to use every third ninjutsu, recasting your Huton buff though. But with the addition of Armor Crush, this has been dealt away with, and if you properly weave your combos, you shouldn't ever have to cast Huton more than once in a fight, which is a sound change in my opinion. And while I can play Ninja from time to time and have fun with the job, the biggest glaring issue with Ninja now is its insanely horrible AoE damage. I'm pretty sure Ninja has the worst AoE damage compared to the other DPS, and might even be the second worst overall, with Paladin firmly in the lead of that category. But despite where their AoE DPS ranks, it's a fun job, and it's got plenty of flashy abilities to just get you immersed into the game, and I enjoy playing it from time to time. At number 8 is Black Mage. Originally in A Realm Reborn, this is probably my least favorite job, mostly because I didn't understand it. And the problem I had with Black Mage was overthinking its abilities. I honestly did not understand Flare and thought there was some hidden part of Black Mage that I couldn't grasp. Turns out, Flare was actually quite simple, like the rest of the job. And once I took the time to actually learn the job after the expansion was released and I was leveling it up, I began to enjoy playing Black Mage more and more. Of course, with the expansion, the simple makeup of Black Mage was done away with, and now Black Mage has a fairly strict single target rotation to follow to ensure Enochian does not wear off. But unlike how I felt with things like Blood of the Dragon and Dreadworm Trance, I actually don't mind Enochian that much. I have a lot of fun with Black Mage, being able to deal great single target and AoE damage in any situation, and seriously, those battle stance and victory emotes are just amazing. Like, can I get those on any jobs to use at my leisure? I mean, those emotes, they're awesome. I wish I could have those all the time. My only real issue with the job is that the proc system has kinda taken a back seat to the job, with Enochian's timing being so strict. You can still use them, but really, if you use them too often or make the mistake of using it at the wrong time, you can really damage your rotation. If they had found a good way to incorporate Thundercloud and Firestarter procs back into the Black Mage's rotation sometime in the future, I would be very pleased. But even so, As it stands now, Black Mage is the first job on this list to be a solid and consistent favorite of mine. At number 7, and right in the middle of the list, is Monk. Originally, Monk used to be the only job to truly suffer from prolonged combat inactivity. It only took a heavy thrust or fire 3 and those jobs were back on track. Things are different nowadays, but Monk was the true father of buff and stance maintenance. For a lot of people, Monk seemed like a really complex job, which is something I never really understood. Because for me, even before and even now, Monk was one of the easiest jobs to play. Positional heavy, yes, but I didn't find it that hard to maintain Grease Lightning, Dragon Kick, and Twin Snakes and everything else you need to maintain as Monk. It just kind of flowed naturally for me. Monk was one of the jobs that barely changed in the expansion. Instead, they just got more damage, and more importantly, a way to combat the potential loss of Grease Lightning stacks, which I thought was awesome, because sometimes it only took a couple GCDs in Form Shift, and you could keep all your stacks even after a short break in combat. However, also because Monk changed so little, the job has become a bit stale to me, and I recently began playing it less just because, well, it's stale and I'm a little bored now. But I can't deny that I love playing it as it is the highest top DPS in terms of personal DPS, and it's just awesome to just rip through enemies. And I mean, come on, getting 15 crits in a row with internal release, it's amazing. At number 6 is Paladin. Back in the Realm Reborn, we all heard the jokes about Paladin's combat, the 1-2-3 combo, and that's it, and it's something I used to laugh at myself, but even then, I loved playing Paladin. It might not have been the most exciting job to play, but it was sturdy and reliable, and like I said earlier, simplicity can be a good thing, and even with the additions to Paladin's combat toolkit, it still retains that simple makeup, and it's just reassuring to see that maybe Square Enix can realize that simple is good and you don't need to make every job complex. And that's really all I have to say about the job. It's simple, it's reliable, and it's fun. It's a great tank and I love playing it. And now we're just gonna get into my top 5. And starting that off is the first healer on the list, Scholar. You know that I specialize in healing, and Scholar was the first healer I leveled to 50 back in 2.0. And at the time, it was just awesome to have this cute little fairy follow you into battle, and it still is. Although as time has passed, Scholar's potential to deal high DPS while only occasionally healing and adding damage reduction buffs has become more and more apparent. And while I do firmly believe and support the idea of healers adding DPS whenever they can, I play healers because, well, I like healing. And that's why even though I love the job, it is my least favorite of the 3 current healers, because I seem to do the least amount of actual healing when I play it. But no one can really deny the overwhelming power and potential that Scholar has. I'd say it's almost overpowered, but their small lack of powerful AoE heals has held it back just enough to keep it from entering that tier, I feel. At number 4 is Warrior. The second job that may be considered a bit too powerful, Warrior is amazingly fun to play. With a good mix of strong defensive cooldowns, good self-healing capabilities, and high DPS, it is easily my favorite tank to play. Fell Cleave is one of the best things that came with the expansion. And unlike Dark Knight where I feel it is overly stuffed and crammed with abilities, the stance switching of Warrior helps to keep the job and its abilities separated and organized without being overwhelming. And just like with Paladin, there isn't really much else to say, it's just a great job and I have fun playing it. And now it's down to my top 3. To be honest, these 3 jobs have switched places among this tier several times throughout the expansion, but it's always been the same 3 jobs in the top 3. And I feel like I have things sorted out enough that I can say why I like each job slightly better than the one before. And so, at number 3 is Astrologian. The newest healer added in the expansion, Astrologian really intrigued me when it was first announced. As I learned more about the job and its support heavy role, I got more and more excited and thought that Astrologian may even overtake White Mage as my main job. And when the expansion launched, I spent the first half hour in Ishgard unlocking the job and then immediately went back to old content to level it to 50. That was the first thing I did in the expansion. And wow, was the job extremely flawed and underwhelming at first. And while a lot of people struggled with it, my experience healing had thankfully helped me get through all of the content. And I was always there with the job to see it improve little by little every few months. And while it isn't my healer of choice, I still play it nearly as much because it's just fun. The cards are exciting to play with and the aesthetics of the spells are absolutely beautiful. And while we're on the topic, best Artifact 2 gear set was definitely Astrologian for me, without a doubt. And what holds this healer back in my third favorite slot really is just one thing. The emphasis on cards is great, and while it takes a little away from the healing aspect, both are fairly balanced, but the DPS aspect is not. It is almost underwhelming how little DPS options there are, especially with AoE damage. Gravity looks and sounds amazing, but as the only AoE DPS ability, it is pretty lacking. Other than that, Astrologian is a beautiful looking job, and it's fun, and I've always loved being able to support the party, and it feels great to just give someone an 80-second balance. And in my second favorite slot is my main job, and that is White Mage. I'm sure many of you thought this would probably be my number one, but to tell you an honest story, White Mage was actually the second to last job I leveled to 50 back in 2.0. And it wasn't until a little into patch 2.1 that I decided I wanted to be a healer in the first place and changed my main to White Mage. And I don't ever really regret it. It set me down a particular path that really changed how I viewed the game and each job. And it just felt great being a good healer. It felt like I wanted to aspire to be a better gamer too, or a better player in Final Fantasy XIV, to really learn the jobs and to really just reach higher to become more skilled. And sure, healing can be unbelievably frustrating and non-rewarding at times, but it's almost become a symbol of what I am and what I do in-game and here in the YouTube community of Final Fantasy XIV. And I love it. I love helping people and supporting others, and healers were the ones closest to that role. And White Mage was the perfect job to really introduce me to the role of healer. It was simple and it was straightforward, but the complexity and difficulty didn't come from the job, but from the role of healer. And from fight to fight and party to party, it was always a different experience, and in the end I'm glad I chose to become a healer. To me, healers always had that high amount of patience and tolerance. They could be gentle and caring. That was the image healer was for me, and I wanted to aspire to it. But before I became a healer, and before I even began playing Final Fantasy XIV, there was one job that attracted me to the game and made me want to sign up for the beta, and that was Bard, which is still my favorite job. And to me, Bard will always be an important thing to me. It was my first main job, and it was a great experience to go through the game for the first time as Bard. I was not a healer, but it was a support job, and that aligned with what I wanted to play, because I always enjoyed supporting others from the side rather than being someone who leads or charges in first. And really, the Mikyote Bard from the End of the Era trailer was really the one who just sold me on the whole thing. Sometimes I can go back and watch that trailer and it just brings back a lot of nostalgia for me, because without that trailer, I may not have even begun playing Final Fantasy XIV. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have met the wonderful friends that I did while playing, or would have been part of the best gaming community I've ever been included in. And even in Heavensward, with Bard's playstyle changing drastically with Wanderer's Minuet, I didn't mind it. In fact, I've learned to like it even more than its original mobile playstyle. And while Bard may have been one of the lowest personal DPS possible, it just makes it so much sweeter when I manage to beat out all the other DPS when I play it. And while I did explain it a bit earlier, it may seem weird to some that since Bard is my favorite job, that it really isn't my main. And it's true that it isn't my main job, but I do still play it a lot, and it is my main DPS. And I do give people the advice, play what's the most fun to you, what you like the most. But the best way I can really put this is that while Bard is my favorite job and it holds a special place in my heart, healing is my favorite role, and I just love healing too much. Although I will say this now, if they ever do add Dancer as a job into the game, I will switch my main to that job. It might be a DPS, maybe a healer. A tank is unlikely, but whatever Dancer is, I've always liked it, both in the Final Fantasy universe and other RPGs in general. So I'm looking forward and hoping for the day that it does become a part of Final Fantasy XIV, and fingers crossed that it is still a healer, because leaving behind healing would just be really tough. And that's all 13 jobs from my least to most favorite. I hope you enjoyed watching, and of course feel free to share your own list and favorites in the comments. I of course don't expect all of you to agree with me, and I am curious to know what everyone's own favorites are. And feel free to like and subscribe if you'd like to continue supporting me. But yeah, that's all I got for you. So hopefully you all had fun. We can all enjoy patch 3.3 soon, or maybe you're watching this in the future and patch 3.3 is already out. But regardless, until our next meeting, sayonara, bye bye.